I don't know about you, but I was curious to see if the Z Flip 3 is actually a good phone or if it's just a gimmick. There are a lot of reviews on YouTube talking about the Z Flip 3 from the perspective of a phone enthusiast. And I think that's awesome. I mean, if you're someone who gets a new phone every year or even a few times a year, this is a super fun phone to try out. But what I wanted to look at is whether the Z Flip 3 offers a good value for the casual user. Let's start out with the design and ergonomics of using this phone. My first concern was that this phone would feel flimsy or like a toy because of the hinge, and I was worried that it would inadvertently open or close. Well, that's not something I think about anymore. This phone is extremely well made, the aluminum frame is quite sturdy, and the hinge feels very solid. Now, I had to learn to let the phone slide down in my hand a little to get more leverage when I'm only using one hand to open it, or I could just actually flip it open once I got it halfway there. The hinge functionality is very smooth and there's virtually no play. The phone itself is a little slippery, and I'm not someone who's super careful with their phone, so I'll definitely need to get some type of case for it. Luckily, the main and cover displays are made of stronger glass than previous models. We're also getting IPX8 rating, meaning that it's water resistant in up to 1.5 meters or 5 feet for up to 30 minutes. Now, this rating applies to freshwater, and I hope to never test it out, but I am glad that it's there for emergencies. The Flip 3 comes in some cool colors. Now, I really like this cream, black, and silver colorway, but it's also available in phantom black, green, lavender, gray, white, and pink. Now, keep in mind that this one is a glossy material and it will definitely show your fingerprints. As far as size, it's a little bit longer than my S21 Plus, which isn't a huge deal in concept, except for one thing. First, let's concede that it's practically a miracle that we have a display that can bend. And that's a pretty crazy concept. So everything else that I'm gonna say should be taken in context. Now, because the phone bends in half, there's a crease in the middle of the display. I'll get to the visual aspect of it in the display section, but from a tactile standpoint, you can definitely feel it. And since it's right in the middle, if you hold the phone in the center, then when you're scrolling through a web page or a document, or even if you're just going through a social media feed, you keep going over it. Personally, I hold the lower part of the phone so that I can reach the keyboard, and I very rarely go over the crease. And even when I do, after the first day, I guess I just stopped noticing it. Now, the problem with holding the phone this way was that it was hard to reach the edge panel, but that's where being able to customize the interface comes in handy. You can easily relocate the trigger to the lower half of the display. There are some important implications for the shape of this phone, which I'll get to in the next section, but all in all, I'm really impressed with the design. The hinge mechanism is super well made and the phone is really fun to play with. Now, when you flip the phone to close, you get a device that's about 2.8 by 3.4 inches or 72.2 by 86.4 millimeters, which in some respects makes it more portable. But of course, what you're gaining in length, you're giving up in depth. So it really depends on how you look at it. Now, another smart ergonomic element is that when you have the phone closed, if you're listening to music or if you're on a call, the controls on the volume rocker are reversed. So the top of the button still increases the volume and the bottom reduces it. Now, finally, from an ergonomic standpoint, I really like using it in flex mode, which means that you have it flat on the desk with the back portion sort of tilted up. This is way more useful than I thought it would be, and it's something that I end up using whenever I don't have a stand. Now let's get to the display, or I guess I should say displays because there are two. So the main display is a beautiful 6.7-inch dynamic AMOLED display with a resolution of 2640 by 1080 and 425 pixels per inch. This was another concern for me because I wasn't sure how good the display was going to be based on the fact that, it has to bend. But I have to tell you, this is a bright, colorful, and crisp display. It's also an adaptive 120 Hz display, meaning that the phone will automatically up the refresh rate to 120 Hz for situations that offer a more fluid and smooth user experience. So for example, if you're navigating around on the home screen or if you're scrolling through some social media feed, the faster refresh rate provides you with a more responsive display. But if you're reading a book and the faster refresh rate isn't useful, then the Z Flip 3 will use the slower refresh rate and at the same time conserve battery life. 120 Hz does drain the battery faster, so if you're in a bind, you can manually reduce the refresh rate to 60 Hz. I'll talk more about battery life and charging in a few minutes, but back to the display. If you're watching video, the image quality is fantastic. The colors are vivid, the video is sharp, and I'm really happy with the overall quality of this display. Now, one thing you'll notice is that because of the wide 22:9 aspect ratio, you're going to get pretty large black bars on the side of your content. And if you try to zoom in, it zooms in so much that it's very likely to ruin the framing of the video. This wasn't that big a deal for me because I just kept it zoomed out, and then it just meant that my hands weren't covering the video. But let me know what you think. The display also comes with a screen protector, which I really appreciate. A lot of times I have whatever phone I'm using in my pocket with my keys, and I also tend to drop my phone way too often, so a screen protector is a must. Now, this display would be protected because it's closed most of the time, but I would add one regardless, so I like that it's included. Now, I mentioned the crease when talking about ergonomics, but how does it impact the look of the display? If you're looking head on, it disappears and you can't even tell that it's there. But if you're looking off axis, then you'll notice it, and some lighting will make it more noticeable than other. Now, even when I notice it, I don't feel like it's really taking away from my user experience. Do I think it would be better if it wasn't there? Sure, but if you want a folding phone, I think this crease is acceptable. Now, one other element that I want to talk about is this plastic black bezel that goes all the way around the display. It's pretty big, you can definitely feel it. My guess is that it's there to add a gap and protect the display when it's closed, but I'd love for it to be a little bit smaller. Now let's get to the cover display, which was one of the main reasons that I decided to try the Z Flip 3. The previous model only had a tiny display that showed the time and then an indicator for alerts. The new display is a 1.9-inch Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 260 by 512 and 302 pixels per inch. Now, in addition to the time, which I have on with the always on display feature, we also have the option to display and sort 6 widgets for weather, today's schedule, music, next alarm, Samsung Health, and timer. I wish there were more widgets, and maybe we'll get some more with an update, but at least the current ones do offer some functionality without having to flip the phone open. The music widget, for example, which you can see active by the musical note icon, allows you to pause, play, skip, or go to the previous track. Now, this feature also works for when you're listening to a YouTube video. The display doesn't show you the video, but the controls still work. And when it comes to notifications, we get an orange dot as an indicator, and we can swipe right to see and interact with each notification. Now, this interaction is pretty much limited to clearing the notification, and things like replying to a message require you to flip the phone open. You can also swipe up on the display for Samsung Pay if you have it set up, or swipe down to modify the display brightness and ringer settings. Finally, I like the default clock display, but you have a lot of different options for the interface, and you can also add background images, which look fantastic on the AMOLED display. If you've gotten value from this video, give it a thumbs up so that I know to make more of this type of content. And if you're new here, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you again soon. Next, let's talk about the camera system and the speakers. The rear-facing camera has a wide 12-megapixel f1.8 camera with dual-pixel autofocus and subject tracking, which I absolutely love, OIS or optical image stabilization to keep your photos sharp and your video steady, and you get up to 10x digital zoom. There's also a 12-megapixel ultra-wide f2.2 for when you want to capture more of the scene, or if you're in a really tight space. There is also a flash at the bottom, but if we're comparing this camera system to something like the S21 Plus, what's missing is a 64 megapixel telephoto camera. Both phones are the same price, but of course a lot of the budget with the Z3 had to be allocated to the folding functionality, so there had to be some concessions there, which I think is reasonable. You can record video at up to 4K 60, slow motion at 1080p with up to 240 frames per second, and then even super slow motion at 720p at 960 frames per second. You can also take pictures and shoot video with the phone closed, but both will be cropped into a square. The front-facing camera is a 10 megapixel f2.4, and it's plenty good for video calls and selfies. You can also use the cover screen as a preview, and you can take photos in flex mode. Now, moving on to the speakers, this is an area where Samsung made some improvements, and the stereo combination of the bottom and the earpiece speakers provides audio that's relatively rich and full for a mobile phone. Now, I mostly use headphones, but when I tested the speakers with video, music, and gaming, they're pretty good. Now, looking at performance, we're getting the Snapdragon 888 chip, and both the 128 gig and 256 gig models come with 8 gigs of RAM. Now, as far as actual user experience, the phone is very fast. Apps and settings were responsive, it never felt laggy, and gameplay, which I'll get to later on, was really smooth. I'm not overly interested in benchmark scores, but if you are curious, in Geekbench it scored 1072 for single-core performance and 3183 for multi-core performance. For the vast majority of users, this phone will absolutely crush anything you throw at it. And the one thing that I wish we got was a 512 gig option, especially because there's no micro SD card slot for expanding the internal storage. If this was a $500 phone, I wouldn't mention it, but for a $1,000 flagship, there is an option for 256 gigs at $1,050, so I don't see the harm in offering 512 for an extra $50. As far as software, we're getting Android 11 and One UI 3.1, and if you're coming from another Samsung phone, you'll feel right at home. Looking at multitasking, we're getting split view, so you can have two apps either stacked in portrait mode or side by side in landscape mode. There are situations where I'm replying to a message or an email and I want to reference something that I'm looking at in Chrome, so it's great to be able to have two apps up at the same time. You are able to connect a wireless mouse and keyboard to the Z Flip 3, but unfortunately it's not able to drive a DeX setup like the Z Fold 3 and the Tab S line of tablets. If you're not familiar with DeX, you can connect an external display and then it will give you a desktop-like interface with an actual desktop with icons, a taskbar, floating windows, and a lot of great features. So it's a little disappointing to see it missing from this model. As far as biometric authentication, we're getting both face recognition with a front-facing camera and a fingerprint sensor that's incorporated into the power button. I really like having both options, so that way I'm covered in every situation, and I very rarely have to actually type in my password. Now let's move on to battery and charging. And this is an area where there are two opportunities for improvement. So first, we're getting a 3300 milliamp hour battery. And as a point of reference, the S21 Plus has a 4800 milliamp hour battery. Again, I understand that we're working with the constraints of the device, and keep in mind that the battery life will depend on things like what apps you're running, how bright your display is, and what refresh rate you're running at. A larger battery would have been nice, and the same would go for faster charging, where the Flip 3 caps at 15 watts for wired charging and 10 watts for wireless charging. A smaller battery with faster charging, or even a larger battery with the current slower charging, would have worked, but having a small battery and slower charging is kind of a bummer. One other thing that I noticed was that if I charge this phone wirelessly while it's closed, it gets pretty hot. And this didn't happen to me if I was charging it wirelessly while it was open. Next, let's talk about gaming, where I found the Snapdragon 888 and the 8 gigs of RAM to be plenty capable for the games that I played. I had really smooth gameplay without lagging or dropped frames, and the only things I noticed were the black bars on the side, similarly to what I got when I was viewing content. So, do I think the Z Flip 3 is just a gimmick, or do I think that it offers a good value for the casual user? This phone costs $1,000, so I'm thinking of other options in the same price range when I'm considering value. The Z Flip 3 is compact to carry, it has a beautiful, bright, large 120Hz display. It's really well made, offers face detection and a fingerprint sensor. It's quite powerful in terms of performance. You can game on it. I really like the flex functionality. It has a nice camera system, and let's keep it real, it looks pretty sweet and it's fun to play with. On the other hand, you have to open it every time you want to use it. There is a crease in the display. The battery life isn't the best. The charging speed is slower than other flagship models. It doesn't come with a charger, and it doesn't offer DeX. I have to admit though that it does deliver on the promise of being a full-size phone that flips, so I'm really curious to know what you guys think. Hopefully this video was helpful. Click on my face to subscribe and then watch one of these videos. You know what I always say? Buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.